In this podcast, the topic of senescent cells is likely going to come up a lot. And there's good reason for that. Time and time again, senescent cells have been proven to be a massive piece of the aging puzzle. And to solve this aging puzzle, we're gonna need to figure out how to get this senescent cell problem under control. Andy Koff is a veteran biotech researcher, starting his career off about 25 years ago at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center with Jim Roberts. He currently has a faculty position at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where he uses a multitude of approaches, biochemical, genetic, and cellular, to identify the proteins and the mechanisms that control how cells replicate. His work has applications in both oncology and in aging and age-related diseases. Andy is now the president and founder of Atropos Therapeutics, a new company that's tackling senescent cells in a very unique way. This was a particularly interesting interview because of the fact that Atropos Therapeutics is such a young company. As an entrepreneur myself, it was fascinating to talk about the problems he's facing, the struggles, and some of the rewards that come from all the hard work. It was an extremely interesting interview from a business and scientific perspective. So without further ado, Andy Koff. Hey, Andy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me here.
Well, for the audience, people that are listening, if they've listened to episode 1, you were actually recommended to me by Tim Cash from Senolytics. And he said you guys were working on some really awesome stuff. So I was happy to get you on the podcast.
Well, I appreciate it. I think Tim is very nice to me.
Tim is a great guy. And so the interesting thing is, I don't want to bore the audience too much because they may have already listened about senescent cells, which is kind of what you're working on. It's a little bit different what you're working on, but let's just refresh people so that they kind of have an idea of what senescent cells are and why they're such a big issue.
So senescent cells it is actually a cell that accumulates in your body with age. These are cells that have left the dormancy state, the quiescent state, and they basically accumulate in your body where they are normally removed by the immune system. And what was actually discovered by Judy Campisi and Jan van Dersen maybe 5 to 7 years ago was it's that the actual accumulation of these cells inside a mouse would actually induce aging phenotypes. It would actually cause inflammation, it would cause tissue damage, and it would make the mice prematurely age. And it also happened during like a normal aging. So the sort of idea has been that we need ways to actually control this senescence inflammation process, and understanding the basic biology of it has the potential to actually affect aging and aging-related diseases. That's how I view it.
So basically, senescent cells they're bad. They're cells that accumulate over time, and they're dead cells. They release this senescent secretory phenotype, something like that, the SASP, which it's really, as I said in the first episode, it's the boogeyman of the cellular world. And it brings the cells down around them, kind of like in a zombie type situation. And generally, it's a very large part of aging. So you said earlier, you mentioned when a cell is in the acquiescent period, and that's actually what you guys are working on, what Atropos is working on. That's more relevant to what you guys are working on. So what exactly does that mean, the acquiescent part of the cell process?
So it's actually called quiescent. Okay, so it's Quiescent, quiescent. And what that means is that the cell has chosen to stop being proliferative. It has left, we call cell cycle. And it sits in this non-cycling state, but it retains the capacity to actually come back into the cell cycle, to actually proliferate and propagate itself. So this state is really poorly understood in biology today. How is it that a cell can languish inside your body for 40 or 50 years without ever proliferating? And what happens to it when it finally decides it doesn't want to stay that way anymore? If it actually doesn't die, does it become senescent? Does it become now irreversibly arrested? Does it secrete this SASP, right? And recruit the immune system to actually take it out, to sort of remove it from the body because it's no longer of any value. I do also want to add one thing. Senescence is not always bad. We have to be careful with this because during wound repair, senescence is actually a very important component of wound repair. So we have to be sure that we separate bad senescence and good senescence.
Right. And that is something that I think I kind of glossed over with Tim in the first interview, is that senescence isn't necessarily always bad. Senescence is basically when you cut your arm and you get scars, right? That would be, it's something that we actually 100% need to be healthy as humans. But the problem is the problem comes when you have too many senescent cells and they start to release that SASP. And that's really when the inflammation starts and all of that bad boogeyman stuff comes up. One thing I wanted to ask was this stage, this quiescent stage, is that after the Hayflick limit? And for those that are unfamiliar with it, the Hayflick limit is after a cell multiplies 50 times or so, give or take a few. That's usually when a cell enters a senescent period.
Right. So it's actually the Hayflick limit sets up a cell that actually becomes senescent. In order to become a senescent cell, you have to exit that mitotic cycle that gave rise to Hayflick limit, right? Because telomeres get disrupted, damage basically accumulates. So this state of non-cycling is actually evident throughout your body. Most of your cells do not engage in the cell cycle at any given period of time. So this is simply a state that is ill-defined, but it is a state where a cell has left the mitotic proliferative cycle and is sitting there waiting to be called upon. You could think of it this way as an analogy that when you were little, you got a immunization against some other kind of like virus. And for 40 or 50 or 60 years, you have retained immunity to that virus because there are basically immune memory cells. These cells are sitting in your body in a non-cycling state, just waiting for that pathogen, that virus, to actually infect you again. And at that point, they come rushing back into the cell cycle. They expand in number and they kill the virus and the virus infected cells. So, quiescence is that long term resting state holding the capacity to actually return into cell cycle.
Right. Okay. So the quiescence is basically, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's the point between when a cell replicates.
When a cell replicates is exactly right. It is the point at which it makes the decision, should I replicate or should I stay?
And so that is what Atropos is doing, which is different than what Tim Cash and what a lot of these other companies is working on. You guys have kind of figured out this biomarker, which is ATRX foci or FOCI, ATRX foci, which is a biomarker that kind of lets you guys know right before this cell decides it's about to replicate. And then it decides, no, we're going to be senescent now. And this biomarker starts to show off when that happens.
This is correct. The big discovery by like Marta Kovacheva when she was in my lab was actually the recognition that a quiescent cell can actually become a senescent cell. And the earliest event that we could find at the time was the change in this ATRX protein, this foci formation. So, what that marks is a cell that is embarking into the senescence pathway from a non cycling quiescent state, right? So that is the underpinning science of Atropos, is that concept that we can follow a cell that is entering into a senescence pathway, and therefore we could probably target a cell that is entering into this pathway.
Okay, and so what does Atropos, what will your treatment do once it basically shows that this cell is about to become senescent?
I am actually going to use the analogy that is present day, COVID-19, right? We are in the process of actually flattening the curve, slowing the rate at which we get infected people into a hospital environment so that the healthcare capacity can actually deal with them. So now, when you are getting older and these senescent cells are actually accumulating, you have to suspect that this is because the normal immune response to these cells is in fact declining with age. They too are undergoing senescence. They too are becoming non functional. So we think the way to sort of target senescence is to simply slow the rate at which quiescent cells become senescent. We're going to flatten the curve, and that will allow the sort of declining immune system that we all have as we age to actually keep up with it, right? To actually clean up senescent cells in a very natural, normal process. So, where other people like Tim has actually talked to you about modulating the SASP, he has talked to you about killing senescent cells, he has actually talked to you about targeting cell surface immunological proteins. We are actually thinking we would like to do is simply slow the rate at which they occur so that the body can handle that capacity as it undergoes chronological aging.
Okay, so I think I understand it a lot better now. So basically, yeah, using the COVID-19 as an example, flattening the curve, that things are going crazy right now with COVID-19 and we're getting more and more cases. And that's basically what is happening to our senescent cells as we age. We're getting more and more senescent cells, more and more COVID-19 cases. And the doctors and the nurses and our healthcare system is our immune system. And they are being overrun by this. The immune system is being overrun by these senescent cells. So basically what you're doing is by slowing down the, let's say, the turning of regular cells into senescent cells, we're allowing the immune system to catch up, just like we're flattening the curve with COVID-19, allowing our nurses and our healthcare system to catch up. And with that, the immune system can come in there and they can help clear out these senescent cells a lot easier than if they were going at the regular pace, if the curve was still going at an unregulated speed.
Right. That is absolutely correct.
That feels really awesome to be able to understand that properly. So that actually I think that answers a little bit of the next question I had, which was why would someone want to choose this, which is kind of slowing down senescent cells as opposed to getting rid of senescent cells using senolytics?
Right. So it's because there are good senescents, right? So sort of getting rid of senescence just to get rid of it You would need some much more efficient targeting. If you think about oncology failures, it's because we didn't know how to target the cancer cells specifically until we had a sort of mutation within that cancer cell that a drug could be designed for, or else that we could harness the immune system to a specific protein on that cancer cell. So I think just killing things in general has a risk unless you can target. So that is actually one reason. The second reason is it just gives you another tool to actually think about the problem. What it does not give you, it does not give you rejuvenation. It does not give you, I am biologically old, which is different than like chronologically old, right? Because we all know 80-year-olds who are incredibly fit playing squash every day, right? Compared to an 80-year-old who isn't. So there's a difference between age by years and age by biology. But what a person who is biologically old would not necessarily see an immediate benefit from the xenosuppressors that we're talking about. However, the rate of their decline, the rate of further biologic aging, we would hope would be blunted. It would be slowed. So this is an idea about improving the health span from that time until the machine ends, right? Because we are all going to die. The machine will end somewhere.
Okay, so basically you're just slowing down aging pretty drastically. And ideally, the sooner you were to start your treatment would be the better.
The sooner within a limit. For example, and again, this is all speculative because, the company doesn't have it yet, right? Is the idea is that when you are 35 years old, right? Let's just call it, biological age 35, your system's primed. It's running great. You don't have to worry about this. When you're 50, maybe this is actually the time to start thinking about it, right? That you want to improve your health span. You want to improve your mobility, your strength, your sort of daily living, I would call it, right? And that is actually when something like a xenosuppressor will in fact be useful. It would just give you a sort of greater health span for a longer time. That might result in like lifespan extension, but that's not really the goal of Atropos.
So the goal of Atropos is really the health span extension part, to really be living a happier, fuller life for longer.
That's correct. I want to play squash until I am 95 years old.
Okay, so that's kind of what separates you from companies like BioTech and Senolytics then.
Correct. That's absolutely right. These guys are more on the repair, rejuvenation issues. I am more classically on I would rather never need repair or rejuvenation. I would rather prevent the problem from occurring. And people have actually tried this before. Lenny Garanti was actually one who has really been pushing NAD. There are people in Austria who have just in the last year put out some other supplement. These are more of a sort of over-the-counter supplementation. We are different from them only in the sense that we have a defined molecular target that is, as far as we know, unique for this quiescence into senescence transition.
Okay, that's a great answer. So I've got quite a few questions about this. So in your deck, you mention an AI partnership with Atomwise.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about what that means and what's going on with that.
So what this means is that what Atropos has actually done is that Atropos has reached out. Well, actually, we didn't reach out. It just sort of evolved in this typical Andy Koff organic way, I would call it, right? Where conversations started. And what this company does is it's that when you give them a protein target, right? The proteins are the workhorses of the cell. They, based on a structural knowledge of what that protein looks like, homology directed knowledge of all the proteins look like, can actually use AI algorithm that they had developed in order to nominate chemical compounds that can interfere with that protein. So we were talking, and they got really excited about this sort of work that we had done academically on this quiescence into a senescence transition, and how we had placed ATRX, a chromatin remodeling enzyme, into this, and how we have shown that this event of that protein is really unique to this biology. So they felt it would be great to point their AI structure based drug design knowledge at our problem. And we thought, well, it's cool. It's not the way we were looking. We were looking at a phenotypic screens, high content drug development stuff. And so we struck a deal with them. And that deal was just finalized this past month. And we will be testing what their AI engine spits out to us. And we would be working iteratively between their sort of AI based pattern recognition, ideas like that. You know, it's all about like how the facial recognition machines work and everything, over to a real biologic system in the hope that we can create a molecule that would specifically affect ATRX foci formation and thus slow down the rate of senescent cell formation. It's really, really cool. It's a great opportunity to work with them. They're very exciting guys doing really cool stuff that is nothing what we normally do. So it's a great collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. And AI and biotech are going to have a very symbiotic relationship going forward as things progress. And as they both grow, they're both going to help each other grow even further. It's really exciting. Some of the stuff I've read about that's going on with AI and biotech, you can just kind of sit back and wait for the explosion, because it's going to speed things up so much. It's really going to be an amazing thing. Now, I want to talk about your guys' results. You guys are in preclinical trials right now, right?
We are in preclinical trials, my friend.
Okay.
We are at, I would effectively call a pre-seed stage, trying to actually get into a seed stage now. So we have actually done screens. We have some hits. We have a natural product pipeline opening up. We have the Atomwise pipeline opening up. But we are in the process of second year of a company, really trying to find out which hit is going to grow into a lead. So we're a real baby on the biotech scale, I would say.
Are there any exciting results from anything so far that you can share?
We got hits, and the hits are actually being tested in a much more diverse, complex systems now. There's sort of like mouse model systems, other types of cells. So I would say we are exactly where we predicted we would be when we started a year ago with lab work. We got funded by the National Institute of Aging, a small business research program for phase 1. And the goal was to prove that ATRX foci can be targeted inside a high content format. And this is the year to actually go show that some of those molecules work in multiple systems, and then step from there into what would be the seed stage, couple of million, $5 million fundraising so that the company can go for 2 or 3 years with the preclinical work.
Well, that's a very exciting time to be running this company. And the entrepreneur inside of me is curious, what is it like to be at this point? I'm sure there's tons of stories happening, tons of exciting stuff happening, tons of probably letdowns that happen. I mean, I've been at that point and I love the hustle. I love hearing stories about it. So I'm just curious, starting a brand new biotech company, what are some of the struggles you're having? What are some of the rewarding things that are happening? Any stories you can share?
Sure. So I would actually say that you need to first know that it had never been my intention to actually be an entrepreneur and start a biotech company. It never was one of the things that motivated me. This was something that just sort of fell into my lap. But I would say the greatest things about it are, in fact, the learning, right? The sort of interactions with the investors, the organizations. It's all of the things that, as an academic guy, I always didn't pay attention to, all the indirect cost issues on my grants and why there's such a big administration to it. But it's also exciting in that you can really see an idea that is academic in nature take on a new commercial problem. I mean, healthspan is a real economic issue. I mean, with people not being healthy, not only the cost to the medical system, the cost in workforce, the cost in mental health for providers and family, it is a tremendous issue. And although I have always studied biologies that have impact in cancer and cell cycle growth control, they never reach that level of worldly magnitude. And the people that I've been able to meet because of this and to share the excitement, the science behind it has been really, really amazing. That said, it's had its problems. There used to be two co-founders, and now there's only me as a co-founder, right? And I brought in a different co-founder. It definitely goes through its growth phases. It's hard. I don't do it full time. I actually have my faculty position as a full-time position, but this opens up newer concepts, newer ideas, and a lot of the ideas I have learned as an entrepreneur are directly related back into how I do science inside my own laboratory. So it's been people in the community where my laboratory is out in San Francisco, like a Douglas Crawford at NBC Biolabs, has been super, super helpful to me. And my advisors have been, because the best thing I think that an entrepreneur ought to learn is admit you don't know anything. And then people are really willing to sort of give you opinions, and then you just pick and choose which ones are going to work for you. And you just have to be open about it. And I think that's been one of the greatest things about it. I mean, I will never do this again. I don't know how people do serial entrepreneurship, but I assume you are all younger than I am. So, so you could keep doing it.
Yeah, it can be quite a roller coaster, but it's a lot of fun. And the ups and downs are definitely worth it when that one thing hits. All the downs are worth it when that one thing hits. And it sounds like you guys are on to something very promising. So I'm really excited to follow along with Atropos as things goes on. And we'll definitely stay in touch with that. At the end of every interview, I like to ask just a few fun questions. I think you probably heard them with Tim, just to see what you think the world is going to be like in a few years, what you expect is going to happen from the biotech industry. I like to get people excited about the industry itself and the promise that it's really, really going to change everything in the next 10 to 20 years. So I guess the first thing I'll start off with is what What is the wildest thing you could see happening in the next 5, 10, and 15 years?
So I think we're seeing is a revolution in biology where it's becoming a sort of engineering discipline that we could take the tools of fundamental biologic discovery and we can change things. We have people working with 3D printers spinning out organ parts now. We have the whole area of rejuvenation medicine. We have an incredible AI contribution to actually understand very, very big and complex data sets that are generated by scientists. I think as this feeds in, this is the time when biology would be what chemistry was in the early 1930, 1940 area. We're just going to be making brand new discoveries every single day. And every one of those discoveries is, in fact, going to be about improving human condition. We now have bacteria that can eat plastics, were just reported. Understanding this is going to catalyze an incredible amount of bioengineering work to actually think about how can you modify it. In the sort of health span space, I said 3D printing of organ parts, pieces, ears, stuff like that. In the sort of health span area, how do you improve a patient's ability, or not even a patient, individual's ability to move and interact within their environment? It's just going to be amazing. And this is the time when I would say college age kids should really be thinking about what can you do. This whole thing with COVID-19, how did this happen? Right? Where were the big sovereign nation funds throwing money into directing sentinel programs and then having virologists around to do things, diagnostics for an infection, for an after infection, vaccine development? Should we use nucleic acid? Should we use proteins? It's a phenomenally exciting time in the science. And the challenge will be, how do you get government, industry, and academics to work together to actually see this realization? And I have no answers for that one. So, but at least we could define it.
Yeah, that's going to be a real tough one. And I want to be hopeful that, at least on that where you just finished off, will be possible in the future. But I think I'm not super hopeful on that end. But regardless, humans find a way. And with enough time, we'll figure things out. What are you doing, if anything, to stave off aging? Is there any protocols you're taking, supplements, habits you do?
So some of my colleagues have some, but me, I actually, at the age of 40, decided that I actually wanted to understand the athlete mindset, which I had ignored as I was a kid growing up, becoming a little scientist to be. And I actually started playing squash. And the things which I have actually found is that physical exercise, a good diet, that's really it. That's actually the best way to actually do this, is to just have that physical exercise diet idea. I'm not a big fan of dropping foods that I like to eat. So that's all that I would say, is I really think it's just about living well. You want to drink, drink. You want to smoke a little, right? But just don't do it in excess.
And do you have faith that in the future, the repair side of things within 10 to 15 years is going to kind of be able to fix a lot of those issues anyways?
Yeah, I do. I definitely think that it would be possible. I don't know what the cost will actually be. And therefore, I don't know if it would be limited to only the wealthy. For example, where you are, there is a big problem in terms of getting a CAR T cell therapy into a patient in that part of the world, because in America, these things are costing $500,000 a patient. And in that area of the world, $500,000 is really limited to a very specific slice of the population. So I don't know whether rejuvenation medicines and 3D printed organs are ultimately going to be cost prohibitive. We're going to have to figure out a way to sort of scale down, because it's for the public good. It's for the good of everyone that we have these sort of tools available. Sounds a little bit Star Trek, right? Beverly Crusher can solve a problem in 47 minutes, but I think that is the right direction in which to shoot.
Yeah, and I think a really interesting conversation that more and more people are having now that they're realizing that this aging thing and this repair thing is likely going to happen. Certain people are 100% positive that it's going to happen, but the interesting thing is how it's going to affect culture, how it's going to affect income disparity. If this is an expensive thing and the rich are just going to live forever, it's going to be really interesting. And that's going to open up a whole other can of worms. But it's far away. For now, let's just try and make the science work.
That's exactly it. Let the science work, and then let all of this be part of the discussion around it, but not be the leader in it.
Exactly. Well, Andy, I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a ton, and it was a pleasure speaking with you.
As did I. I really enjoyed it, and thank you so much for reaching out to me.
If you got this far, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. If this was at all interesting to you, I'd love to connect on Instagram and hear your feedback. I'll also be posting clips from the latest episodes, as well as anything else I find interesting about the biotech industry. You can find me on Instagram at SimpleBiotech. And if you're interested in the companies that I'm looking at and the companies that I'm excited about, connect with me on AngelList at angel.co/James Rule. That's James, Ruhle. Thank you so much, and be safe out there.